This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Algorithms for Functional Genomics. My name is Douglas Pires, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'll be your lecturer for the next 12 weeks, and apologies for this delay. Apparently, the lapel microphones that were supposed to be here were taken, so nobody knows where they are, and we'll just, oh, I need to be here, sorry. Can everybody see me? Okay, yeah. And we try at least for this lecture like this. And yeah. We try to cover all the bureaucratic, oh, okay, we have it. Okay, better. I'm free. That's fine. I think this is picking up. Yeah, if it doesn't, that's fine.
Just to make sure the frequency is right.
Just a record.
That one, use that one. I'm just going to check the understand what the frequency is for that one.
Okay.
I'll set it to it.
Okay. If this one's work, that's fine for today.
How one's going.
Yeah. I'll just stay still here. That's it. Okay, let's try this again. Can everybody hear me? Yes, let's do this then. As I was mentioning all over again, my name is Douglas Pires. I recently relocated from a very sunny country, Brazil, and I've been here in Melbourne for 2 months, and I recently joined the School of Computing Information Systems. So I'm at Doug McDonald Building 326 if you need me. And for this semester, we're going to have a tutor, which is Miss Hannah Huckstep, which is based at the WE High. And I'd like to start with a very special thanks to Dr. Claire Sloggett, which put this course together. I'm just picking up from the work she built over the years. And the way I would like this course to go, this subject to go, is I would like it to be very informal. So please feel free to ask questions, interrupt me at any time, just raise your hands. We have a average to full auditorium, but it's fine. Like, I don't promise to memorize every name, but I might ask questions. So please feel free to ask questions. If you don't, I might ask. I might scan the audience, and yeah, it's not to make you uncomfortable or anything. It's just to make a really nice environment for us. And I hope you guys enjoy it. And in terms of logistics for the semester, I think that's important things that we need to cover. Is we'll have 2 lectures a week here at the Malaysian Theatre and next door at the Singapore Theatre, both of them here at the Clint Davis building from 3:15 to 4:15, so 1 hour lecture, so you guys don't get too bored with me yada 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 all the time. So it's a short lecture, so we try to pace ourselves. And we also have 4 tutorial slots open, 3 of them at the Alan Gilbert building and 1 at the electrical engineering. The important thing is, please make sure you sign up for one of the tutorials. We'll have 1 per week. And for this first week, we'll start easily And the main purpose will be actually a week 0 tutorial. Not sure if any of you were brave enough to go today at 8 a.m. Yeah, anybody? Oh, kudos. Yes, well done. Morning person, I like to see that. Yeah, so for week 0 is just setting things up, making sure you have the correct environment, you understand the tools we're going to use. And that's for week 0. And from week 1 onwards, we'll have a more hands-on approach using the tools in programming as well. So the first thing the main thing for week 1 is making sure you understand the environment. So we're going to use Jupyter notebooks during the tutorials, and the assignments will be handed in as Jupyter notebooks as well. So that's very important that you're comfortable with it. And for this semester, we also have a Jupyter Lab server that you guys can use. And most of you have been included automatically, so you can access that using your UniMelb credentials. If by any chance you can't access, please let us know. Send either Hannah or myself an email so we can sort out access for you, okay? And we also have an introduction to programming led by Hannah as well. Is Hannah here? No, not yet, okay. And this will be based on the first week onwards. In terms of assessments, so important things, we will have 2 assignments, so 15% of the scores each. Assignment 1 will be released on week 3, will be due on week 5. Assignment 2 will be released on week 7, will be due on week 10. They have a 50% hurdle, and assignments will require programming. I understand when this course was planned, there was no previous programming requirement, but I understand that you can see this as an opportunity to pick up a new skill if you don't have it yet. Just by the haze of Rance, how many of you have a computational programming background? Okay, 20%. You know how to program, it doesn't it? Yep. Okay. Okay, so for 80% of you, this will be a really good opportunity to pick up a new skill that has become increasingly important, especially in bioinformatics. And considering most of you are from masters in bioinformatics, I think that's a good opportunity. So let's try to capitalize on that. And yeah, and after the assignments, we will also have a final exam worth 70%, written exam. Unless otherwise noted, lectures, labs, assignments, they are all examinable. And also the dates here might change slightly, so please just keep an eye on the LMS. All our formal communication will be via the LMS. And this is a requirement for the university. I need to talk about this. So the university takes plagiarism really, really seriously. Okay, so if you need more information on this, please take a look at this. So the assignments, they're supposed to be your work independently. So be really, really careful not to copy your words from anywhere. Use your words, use your code. That's really, really important. As I said, university has really serious rules and consequences regarding plagiarism, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. And in terms of the main discussion forums, for us, LMS will be our main tool to communicate. I would like us to communicate a lot. I promise quick response and turnaround on LMS. If you send me any emails, that might take a little longer, but on LMS, if we communicate through there, I promise a quick turnaround. And it's important also, the reason why I'm pushing this is if you have one question, other people might have the same question, is a way to help each other as well during the semester. So everybody benefits if we use it. And in terms of student representatives, if you'd like to volunteer to be a representative, raise concerns from the classmates and deliver it to us, just get in touch as well. This is optional, of course, but if you feel free to do that. And one more last thing that is quite important is the background survey. So we put together a background survey just to know where you guys come from, what's your background, what your interests are. So if you already have or not a programming background, how strong is your biology background, and this will help us a lot. And it's optional and anonymous, but I would really, really appreciate if every single of you would either pick up a laptop or a phone and do it right now, or do it by the end of the week. That'd be really, really important for us. And this helps us shape and improve the the course every semester. And in terms of feedback, I'm happy to receive feedback throughout the course. As I said, this is the first time I'm delivering this subject. I'm a specialist in bioinformatics. So my background is I did my degree in computer science back in Brazil. My PhD is in bioinformatics. So I'm quite comfortable with both areas, but I also did a postdoc in biochemistry. So I did the full interdisciplinary thing. But it's important to know whether information is delivered. That's a really interesting challenge, whether you guys are making the best out of this. And I really, really appreciate constructive feedback that can be done throughout the course. Also, at the end, you will be asked to complete a survey about subject experience. As I said, constructive criticisms are more than welcome. So please focus on things that I can actually change. So focus on things we can change and are under our control. If you say, oh, the room is too warm, or I don't like Douglas's voice, or he's short, there's not much I can do about that. I'm not wearing high heels, that's for sure. And but yeah, constructive things, I'm more than welcome to take them on and improve. Okay, as a lecturer. And the main course objectives then. This is an algorithms course, as the name says. Duh, yes. It's an algorithms course. It's not a biology subject, even though genomics concepts, they are important and will be required to understand the purpose and constraints of the algorithms and the data we are using. So today we'll have a crash course on algorithms. It's not to teach you how to program. This is to raise awareness of the things that might be important for you to think when you are coding. And on Friday, we'll have just a recap on main genomic concepts. Is that okay? If I'm talking too quickly or slowly, just raise your hand. I can also adapt that. I understand I have an accent, but yeah. And also the main aim. So at the end of this course, you would hopefully will be able to understand what algorithms are important in functional genomics area, how they work, their advantages, and mainly their limitations, whether they are appropriate for your problem or not, and why, when, and how to apply them. And then during the tutorials, we'll have 13 tutorials. We'll have a mix of analysis, data analysis tutorials using diverse tools, developing new ones, and also programming ones, okay? But nothing to worry about. In terms of the course overview, the main themes we're going to cover. So next week, we're going to start talking about multiple alignments, local and global. We're going to cover genome assembly, molecular evolution, and phylogenetic trees. We're going to talk a little bit about network analysis and graph theory, and we'll finish it up with single-cell analysis and a bit of machine learning. So it's a bit of everything, even though we're just scratching the surfaces of each area. So this is to raise awareness, to understand what's out there, what you can actually use, and then it's up to you to actually understand what's going on and really, really build upon that. So this week, important things for this week are really background survey. Please reply to that. I understand it's optional, but it's really, really helpful. It's been really, really helpful. And please read the course information document in LMS. Sign up for a lab slot if you haven't, and come to a lab as well. So, a brief introduction to algorithms. Brace yourselves, because it's going to be, how many minutes? 40 minutes of everything in algorithms. Not really, but it's important just to raise awareness about a few things. And especially if you've never programmed before, the first things to know is programming is just all about logic. All right? It's logical statements. That's how we rationalize and solve problems. We think about constructions and construct new methods to solve those problems. So since programming is all about logic, just to show you how we can apply logic on a simple example, I have two examples here to how to apply logic. And I understand they can be a little naive and stupid, so let's see if they are too easy for you. So the first problem is the following. You're an astronaut, okay? And you made an unexpected friend. So all the alien needed was really a hug. See how happy he is? He's really happy. He just needed a hug from you. So you made this unusual friend. And when you make new friends, what you do? You try to communicate, especially if considering it's from a different galaxy potentially, and considering Melbourne is also a very international city. when you meet someone that doesn't speak the same language as you, what you try to do, you try to communicate, teach your own language, and of course, you try to learn a few words too. And you actually did, from the alien. You learned 2 words, ba and ha. That's not Klingon. I'm not that cool, okay? These are made-up language, ba and ha. And they're very simple, because one of them is yes, one of them is no. But like me, you have a terrible memory. You mix them up, you don't know which one's which. And before your friend leaves, you actually ask, does ba mean no? What does your friend reply? Ba or ha? There's only one correct answer. Fine. And coming to the first picture I showed, scanning the audience, and yeah, anyone want to try? And explain why? Okay. What's your name? Chris. Yeah. Rob. What? It was just a guess, or? It's correct, but what? Yeah, pretty much, right. The logic is the following. So you have a word, ba, and another word, ha. One can be yes, one can be no, and there are only 2 options. So if ba is no, you're basically asking, does no mean no? What do you answer? Yeah. What if it's the opposite? Does yes mean no? No. So you always replying the opposite. So it doesn't matter if ba is yes or no. You always need to reply the opposite. So correct answer is always ha. Okay? This is just logic. So you have Boolean conditions. So it has yes or no, true and false, and you basically evaluating each of the 2 variables. Okay? Very, very basic, simple logic. My 5-year-old cousin could solve this one. Let's try a slightly more difficult one. Okay? And this one, my cousin of 10 years old can solve it. I have a lot of cousins. Big family. For this one is the following. So you have 9 billiard balls. You play pool a lot, okay? And you have this ancient thing that not sure all of you know, which is a balance scale. You know what? Have you ever used a balance scale before? Seen one? No. A few. So the purpose of balance scale, it doesn't show you what's the weight of an object. It's a comparison. So at the olden days, someone would have a reference of, say, like, this is a kilo, and put a metal thing there. This is a kilo, and you put potatoes on the other side until it matches and balances, and then you have a kilo of potatoes. So you have that, and you have 9 kilovolts, okay? And one of them is heavier. Only one of them. You don't know which, and you want to know which. So what's the minimum number of times you have to use the scale to find out which one is heavier? The minimum number. Yeah? No. Yes? 2? Okay. Wow. Okay. Can you do 8? Let's try it slowly. 8 is fine, right? Let's get a very dumb procedure to test everything. I get this ball, number 10, put it on the one side, and test all the other 8. That's one way to use it 8 times. That's not really smart, right? So you said 2. How would you do it with 2? Okay. Okay. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Everybody got it? So you actually only need twice. You can actually use twice. You have 9 balls. This is a way to divide the search space, right? You have 9 balls. You divide it in 3 groups of 3. You leave one of those groups out, and you weight 3 on one side, 3 on the other side. If they weigh the same, you know the heaviest is on the other one. If they weigh differently, you know what group of 3 have a heavier ball. Then you select that group of 3, and you do the same. So you put one ball aside and weigh 1 and 1. If they weigh the same, you know the one that you left is the heaviest, and so on and so forth. So you can solve the same problem using different approaches. The thing is, what's the best approach? And that's thinking logically. And that's how you build an algorithm. You think about a solution, you think about the best possible solution for you that will run in time and will spend as the least computational resources as possible. But what's an algorithm? So how do we go from logic to algorithm? What's an algorithm? What do you think it's an algorithm? What is your definition of an algorithm? Have you read this book then? Because exactly that. Yeah. So an algorithm is basically a sequence of steps, procedures, that modify input data and transforms it in an output data. An algorithm is a method to solve a problem or a set of instructions to solve a problem. It's how you define, how you go from A to B. And algorithms are everywhere. They're not only computational. So a cooking recipe could be seen as an algorithm. So you modify input, ingredients to get an output, a cake. Not that I can't do that, I can't, but yeah, some people can. And you can have instructions to assemble a desk, driving directions from A to B, rules to play a game. These are all algorithms. So sets of instructions to solve a problem. Sets of instructions to go from a set of readings to assemble genome, for instance. And the main thing is algorithms, they process and modify or import your data. Thank you. Yeah. Is this better? Oh, that's awful to hold it up. Yeah, we already started. And algorithms, they process data. So they modify data. And we live in a data era. So over the past 20, 30 years, we've experienced an explosion in biological data generation in terms of sequencing efforts, imaging, medical imaging data, signaling processing, and solving protein structures. We have accumulated a lot of data over the years. And the question is, how do we best process this data and extract information? Because data accumulated in a database, it's absolutely useless. What you're going to do with the sequence deposited there? Absolutely nothing. So you need to extract patterns from data. And data can become information, and information can become knowledge, and knowledge can become wisdom. That's the triangle of data mining, basically. But in order to do that, we need algorithms to process this data. And data is encoded in the computer, so we're talking about digital data. And the computer will read then binary cells. That's why we need an algorithm that is efficient for that. So data will be stored and accessed and organized in a way in memory. So your sequence will be then translated into something that a computer can actually understand and read and process. That's the main thing. How do we process this information? And this is what the algorithm do. So we also need data structures that will define how to store this information and which operations we can actually perform on your data. All right? And basically, to define this data structure, we need these two things. How do we store and what kind of operations we can perform this? And one example of this data structure, for instance, a very simple one is a list or a vector. You can think of it as a list of genes, a list of proteins, a list of hits you have. And this is stored sequentially in memory. And the operations you can perform on lists are basically, you can access the list. You can ask questions, for instance, like, what's the nth element of the list? What's the first? What's the last one? And you can then access the list. Let's say my list, item index 0, and then I print the first element of the list. So the way they are stored in memory, sequentially, and which the type of operations you can perform actually define a data structure. For instance, you can also remove items from a list. You can remove the first item, you can add items at the end, and that's your list or vector. A very simple thing. But so it's like a contiguous array of things in memory. But you can have variations of that contiguous thing in memory. For instance, a queue. What's a queue? What comes to mind when you say queue? Going to the cashier, waiting, and then waiting a little bit more, which is the first come, first serve principle. First in, first out. That's a queue. And you might need to have that data structure for a problem. So the main thing here is to understand what's better for you and what's more efficient for your problem. For instance, the difference between a queue and a list is a queue, you always add items at the end, you always remove items from the beginning, right? So first in, first out principle. So instead of saying add my item, I say enqueue my item on my queue or dequeue from my queue. I don't need to say which one because I always remove from the beginning. And what about a stack? So we're talking about contiguous thing. So a queue, we have the first in, first out principle. A stack is basically first in, last out principle. So if you're stacking plates, you always remove from the top. You can try to remove from the bottom. You're going to hurt yourself and you're going to break a lot of plates. So a stack is a data structure that uses this principle. First in, last out. So you add at the top, you remove from the top. Okay? And there are several occasions that you might choose one of these, for instance, to implement part of your code. And for instance, for the stack, you push an item on your stack or you pop an item from the top. But the main thing is in data structures, and this is just very simple examples, it's choosing what's the most adequate for your problem. And in terms of general qualities of algorithms that we process data structures, they need to be correct, right? So there was a programmer one day that his mom said, honey, please go to the market and buy 1 bottle of milk. If they have eggs, bring 6. And it came with 6 bottles of milk. And she said, why the hell did you bring 6 bottles of milk? Because they had eggs. Is his logic correct? So what's the purpose of developing an algorithm that is not correct? So that's the first thing you need to be sure you're actually modeling and having the correct steps to solve your problem. And the first one is, does the algorithm give the right answers for you? An algorithm that doesn't give 5 answers is a high throughput error generator, which is useless. So that's the first thing, making sure the logic that implements the algorithms is correct. So correctness is a quality of an algorithm. And also efficiency, which answers the questions, does the algorithm produce an output in an acceptable amount of time? Is it going to take 2 hours to run? That's fine. It's going to take 2 million hours. That's not feasible. So is it accessible in terms of memory space? Oh, it's going to take 4 gigs of memory. That's fine. I can run from my laptop. It's going to take 2 terabytes. It's either finding a proper cluster to run or rethinking the algorithm. So you need to understand efficiency. And are different ways. So you can solve the same problem in a very efficient way, in a very inefficient way as well. So it's very important to understand this concept, especially when we're talking about bioinformatics, large data sets, and we live in an era of big data and petascale. And even though computational power has followed Moore's law, we always find a way to run out of power. Okay? Does anyone know what Moore's law stands for? Yeah? Moore's law? Anyone? Yeah? You can say?
Something will double every 2 years.
Yeah, so that's basically it. Moore's law is basically, it's not an actual law, it's an observation and then a prediction. So the observation was that this was done by Gordon Moore, Intel CEO, that the number of transitions or registers you can put on an integrated chip, a microchip, was going to double every 2 years. So exponential growth in terms of considering the same area, how many transistors you can put. You can translate that in terms of computational power. And that held for decades. So we're putting more and more transitions on the same space, though they were becoming smaller and smaller and shrinking. But physics is not always that nice, so you can only shrink that much. And what happens is, if you shrink too much, you start having quantum interferences and all that. So there is a physical limitation to the number of resistors we can actually put in an area. But Moore's law these days is also valid when you think about the number of cores we have on a CPU. So number of cores is doubling up. So now you can get microchips, CPUs with 16 cores, 32 cores, 64 cores. And this is growing, especially when you consider graphics processing units as well. But that's the thing. regardless of the computational power, we always need to approach the problems thinking of correctness and efficiency. It doesn't matter, oh, this is going to run in 5 minutes, I have a cluster with 3,000 cores to run. No, what's the correct thing, it's a good practice would be, what's the most efficient way I can actually go around and solve this problem. But however, sometimes we trade correctness for efficiency. But not correctness in terms of I'm not getting the correct answer, but in terms that sometimes the optimal answer is impossible or infeasible or have not been invented yet. So you might have a problem that it could take a long time to solve, and you might trade off between efficiency and correctness, for instance, via an heuristic or via an approximate algorithm. And a heuristic is basically a sufficient strategy. Let's say you have 10 terabytes of data and you can't afford processing everything using a standard procedure. You can do a sampling unit. So let's say if you have 80% chance to find what you need on a very small subset, you go for it. So it's a trade-off, okay? You still have a good chance of achieving your goal, but then you're trading it with efficiency. So you might not get the optimum, but you trade that for efficiency, okay? That's an heuristic. And also, you can do it via an approximation algorithm. And the main difference between heuristic and approximation is an approximation guarantees, that's a good exam question actually, guarantees a solution that is close to optimal. Saying heuristic, you could say anything for an heuristic really. It might be a good or bad heuristic, but in terms of approximation, you guarantee I'm 90% close to the optimum or something like that. That's the main difference between them. And yeah, let's put this into practice and think about correctness and efficiency and how do we solve the same problem in two different ways. And one very traditional way that's been around for a long time in computer science is sorting algorithms. They have evolved a lot over the years, not so much in recent years because we hit a theoretical maximum. But if we think about sorting algorithms, this is something that is very, very common. It might sound a bit lame, but no, this is quite interesting if you think about it. How would you go about in sorting, let's say if you have a deck of cards, how do you go about sorting it? If we go around and people describe how would you do, it's probably that we will come up with different strategies, right? You can say, well, I'll go spread everything on the table, I'll pick up the smallest one, put here first, then I'll pick up the second one, and then the third, the smallest one, and then I sort them. That's selection sort. Or you can do something like this, which is insertion sort. Well, considering algorithms are a modification of an input and transforming it to input, so you have on inputs a list of numbers in a random order, and you want them numerically sorted. So insertion sort, what it's going to do is, let's try to just read this pseudocode. It's for each number in the pile, so you have these numbers here. If it's already sorted for a given number, let's say starting with 4, with respect to earlier elements, so it's first one, doesn't matter, move on to the next one, okay? If it's not sorted, the next one, in respect to the earlier, insert it in the right place in the list so far by comparing it to each other earlier elements until the list is full and sorted. So what happens is basically this. So we start with 4. There's the first one. I don't have anything to say about it. The next one is 3. Is it sorted? No, it's not sorted. So I try to find the correct position for it. So finding a place that it's nobody before it is smaller. It's larger, which would be here. If we start with 2, the correct place for 2 would be here. And 10 is already sorted, so I don't need to change it. 12 is already sorted, I don't need to change it. So every single number before is smaller than 12. 1 needs to be sorted, so I put it in the right place. So I move this way until I find the correct place. Then 5 goes, then 6 goes, and then you have your sorted algorithm. That's one way to do it, right? Is it the best way? Not sure. But if we try something slightly different, slightly more interesting, which is called merge sort, which is still one of the best algorithms for sorting these days. And you still start with the same pile of cards. and you still want your outputs, this pile of cars, numerically sorted. But this difference here is the algorithm will go like this. If the list has length 0, 1, then it's already sorted, right? If you have a list with no items, you don't need to sort it. If you have a list with one item, it's already sorted. Otherwise, you split the list in two halves, as close as possible. You sort each of them using the same algorithm, and then you merge the two sorted lists back. So you split it, and then sort these two halves, and then merge them back together, okay? But an important thing here is I'm using the algorithm in the algorithm definition. This is called recursion, okay? I'm using the algorithm in the algorithm definition, meaning this is how it's going to do. So you have these 8 numbers here. You're going to divide it in 2, then divide it in 2 again, divide again, and again. Once you have 1, well, the list is already sorted. So you need to go back and merge them. So you merge this one and sort them back. And for this one, you need to just merge them and sort them while you're merging it. And that's it. And for this one as well, you go back and merge in a sorted way. Same thing here, you don't need to sort because they're already sorted. And now you have these 4 pairs. And you go back and merge these 2 together. There's a little bit GIF. And then you sort these 2 together. And finally, you sort the 2 halves together. And in the end, you have your final vector sorted. And what I was mentioning about recursion is you have a definition, so don't worry too much about the code, but this is a valid code in Python. And you have your merge sort, which receives a list or a vector of numbers. And the main important thing is it's going to break them into halves. And one half is going to be called top, the other half is going to be called bottom, and you basically merge the 2 sorted ones, okay? And this is more efficiently, and we will see how this is more efficiently than just doing an insertion. Yeah, I already answered that. Yeah. And but the way we say that this is more efficiently is using something that is called runtime performance. So there are basically 2 ways to assess the runtime performance of your algorithm. One of them is empirical. So by measurement, you actually run a small, a basic procedure and a good standard to follow would be, well, before I run my algorithm on 2 petabytes of data, I try it on smaller data sets and see how it behaves and measure the time. That's empirical measurements. And this way you can actually predict how it would behave on a larger scale. And the other way is theoretical, so by mathematical modeling and reasoning. And they are both equally important. So when you're building a new algorithm, it's important to understand empirically how your algorithm works, but also to do a theoretical analysis to understand the boundaries in terms of their efficiency. And and the limitations is empirical analysis will only give you information on real data. So only the real data that you actually choose. It might not be representative of the real world. And so it's information on real data, which is a good thing, but however, it's limited to your selection of that data. And what theoretical analysis will do is, can we make a more general statement about running time complexity of this that covers more larger sets of conditions? Meaning, how does my algorithm behaves when I change the size of my input? And you can have, for instance, empirically, you can see these curves, and this will be empirically, but interesting thing will be, can we draw a general statement about running time? And this is theoretical complexity called asymptotic complexity. Okay, this is a whole entire course in computer science. I'm just raising awareness that you need to know how your algorithm behaves, otherwise you can't plan your experiments. And asymptotic complexity would say basically how does runtime of your algorithm varies with your input size. Okay? And we will have a mathematical function to try to describe your runtime. And one of the main notations for that is called big O notation. And the big O notation describes a limiting behavior of a function, all right? So it's classically used to classify algorithms in complexity theory. And for instance, the merge sort algorithm we looked, they have a complexity of O n log n, being n the size of your input data that you actually have to sort. And so the number of operations you need to actually perform to sort this vector will be n times log n, all right? And that's for in case of merge sort, in the best case scenario, worst case scenario, and average cases as well. So we say that the computational complexity of a merge sort is O n log n. Okay, that's the proportion of operations I need to do to sort my vector. And why is this so important? For instance, if we propose a new algorithm out of the blue, that's how I'm going to approach this problem now. That is completely different to the others. And let's say the number of steps and comparisons required to sort a vector of size n is given by this function. So we model it. And looking at the code, we say, well, on average, we need this polynomial function, quadratic function. And how do we express this in big O notation? What big O notation was going to do, as is basically interested in boundaries, we will basically ignore any constants. For instance, this is just opening up a file, closing up a file, and you can consider that constant. So it's not relevant for the overall behavior of the algorithm. You can also ignore lower growing terms, because when this n grows too much, the important terms will be the quicker growing ones. So if you have an exponential term and a polynomial one, it doesn't matter the polynomial side, because you have a function that's dominating. For instance, the n2 will dominate when n is big. So this is calculus 1 limits. When n goes to infinite, these don't matter. So in terms of the big O notation, we would then say that your function grows at the order of the quadratic term, which is this one. So even disconsidering this 2 here. And we then say that your function that describes your algorithm says that your algorithm is O of n2. So it's a quadratic algorithm, which is the complexity of sort by insertion, for instance. Okay? And why is this important? If you think about it, you have all these types of classifications and notations. A O1 algorithm, meaning the algorithm has a constant cost, running cost, and also this is applicable for memory as well, to run something. So let's say if you have an input of size 10 and it costs 2, it doesn't matter. You can increase your input to 100, it's still going to cost 2, and you can have your input to 1,000, it's still going to cost 2. Does this exist for sorting algorithms or for a predictor, machine learning based predictor? No. Only if you have an oracle, you can do something that is constant. Usually things behave based on the size of your inputs. That's why it's so important, because let's say, and you have other notations, for instance, a logarithmic scale or a linear one, but if you have a problem, and that's very common, that it's a larger polynomial or exponential, it might look okay when you do a sampling. If you test it on a small scale and you look at it, oh, this is the time it takes in seconds, right? So let's say, I have an exponential algorithm, that's fine. I'll test it in 10 sequences. It takes 100 seconds, that's fine, that's 20 minutes. That should be okay. What happens if I multiply the size of my input by 10? Yeah, that's not a good idea. So this is the difference between 2 to the 10th and 2 to the 100. And this is 2 to the 1,000. That's larger than the number of atoms in the universe. So exponential growth is a very problematic thing, and it's more common than you might imagine. So there are a lot of problem classes that fall into either exponential, factorial, or large polynomials that might be tricky for you. I mean, even large polynomials, this is basically O to the nc, so you have a constant here, right? Not to confuse with this. So this is polynomial, so n to a constant. It could be 2, 3, 4, and these you have a constant to n. So the difference is n is the size of your input, okay? And this can already be really drastic for you. Depending on what you're actually analyzing, a polynomial algorithm might not be good enough. Okay? And that's why we need to be aware of how algorithms behave and understand their complexity. And big O notation is one way to do that. And actually, to properly plan an experiment, you need to understand how your algorithm behaves. Therefore, you can plan it ahead, how long it's going to take. And this is also valid for memory usage, how much memory it's going to take. Okay? And examples of running growth functions, you have one which is independent of size, and you can have, for instance, an exponential one, which would be simply considering all subsets of n elements. That's very simple. You could have many, many different problems that you might be working on during your master's or PhD that you just need to, enumerate all subsets in a group, and you can't. Or consider all permutations of n elements, and that's not tractable. And that's why, and that's not tractable if you try to enumerate one by one, which we call brute force algorithms. But there are other ways to go around. There are heuristics and approximation algorithms as well. And there are other two types of notations, which are the big omega and the big theta. And big O is bounded above. That's the main difference. Big omega is bounded below, and big theta is bounded above and below. It's kind of thinking about worst case scenario, best case scenario, and average. Okay, you don't need to worry too much about this, but the big O notation is the most commonly used to describe the performance of an algorithm. And if we take a quick look at that merge sort algorithm, what's going to happen is you start calling merge sorts for your list, and this is going to split the list into halves, and it's going to call merge sort for these two halves. It's going to split again and again. Once I only have one item, it's going to go back and merge them in the proper order. Merge them in the proper order, and these two will be merged, these two will be merged and correctly ordered, and then I merge them again and again. And that's how the process for merge sort works. But the important thing here is the number of comparisons I'm doing. So this is a binary tree. And the number of comparisons is, first of all, proportional to the number of merge steps I have, and proportional to how many of these calls I have, which is proportional to the height of a tree, and the height of a binary tree is proportional to the log of the number of elements. So if I have 8 elements, I have log 8 in terms of height, so 1, 2, and 3. If I have 16 elements, I have just one more level here. 32, just one more. 64, and so on and so forth. So the theoretical analysis for merge sort is basically, we have log 2 levels in terms of levels of recursion, how many times I'm going to actually call the method, and how many times we will cut the list in half. And on each level, we are going to take n steps to actually merge the subvectors back together. So what we basically have is n times log n, which will give us the total cost. And the main question is, even though I mentioned this is one of the quickest sorting algorithms there, you can always ask the question, is this tractable for input size? That might not be the case. You might have an input size that's too big for this. You might need a heuristic, you might need an approximation algorithm, even though it's quite quick. Okay? And this comes to the other concept we need to understand, which is tractability. Okay, when you're considering big O notation, you can divide problems in classes, and there are basically 2 classes. We say the algorithms with polynomial complexity following this type of big O notation, they are tractable or easy, or, well, you usually can have an exact solution for them. While algorithms with super polynomial complexity or exponential or factorial, they are considered intractable. Meaning, if you grow the size of input too much, then you won't have enough time to finish your thesis, to run it, or to live as well. And it might sound strange and out of this word, but it's more common than we think. For instance, there's a very common problem called the travel salesman's problem, which is also intractable, which is a simple thing. So you have a travel salesman, And he wants to visit a lot of cities. He wants to visit each city once, starting in one city, going rounds, and then coming back to the same city. So he only wants to go once per city, starting one, finishing the same one, and doing that, taking the shortest path. That's a very common and applicable environment. But this is a class of problems called, it's part of a class of problems called NP-complete, that you don't have, there is an unknown polynomial algorithm to solve it. So we actually do it by heuristic and approximation. And for those that are brave enough to actually Google this and understand this, there's the definition of NP-complete is basically a problem that is reducible to another one. And the main thing for you to think is, what if your problem falls under this class? Are you going to try and implement an algorithm to solve it? Definitely not. You need to think about an heuristic or an approximation, or give up and try again. Nope, never. But think about it and think critically before you start running your experiments. And we're getting to the end of the class. I think there was a lot of information, but the main thing for us today is to try to understand the main problems when you're developing an algorithm or using an algorithm. You need to understand how it behaves in terms of your input size. You need to make sure that it's correct and efficient. And just reiterating that this is for bioinformatics students, or originally was, hoping to write new tools and new algorithms. And we will try over the course of the next years to understand methods and apply methods. We're running existing tools and developing code as well. And this will be really a high-level overview. So we're not going to actually sit down and program, not here, but we'll have the tutorials for that. And we'll give basically a programming landscape in bioinformatics and computational biology, obviously focusing on functional genomics, and also give an overview and reference of useful tools for you. And in terms of programming languages, there are no silver bullets. So if you need to pick up a new language, you might end up with the case that one language is not enough, that they have different purposes, for instance. But if you're starting now and you need to choose a couple languages to learn, I would advise between Python and R. Python has been really used in bioinformatics, and R as well. And R is very important for data analysis and statistics. If you have any chance to take a look, I think it's very important. It's open source. It has a lot of great packages, and that's the thing, not reinventing the wheel, but understanding how things work and be able to reuse things. And it's not that computationally efficient, but it helps a lot to start with, and especially for data analysis and statistics. But Python, on the other hand, is a really good first language for you. It's very easy to learn and intuitive, and it's open source as well, and can be very efficient. And it's very important if you're thinking during the course of your master's or PhD doing some web development as well. So Python is really good for that. Not quite efficient as C, but it's quite good as well. Not as good with the stats as R. And there are other languages. I'm not going to worry about this much. You can try and think and take a look at this. I am old school, so I started on bioinformatics doing Perl. This is almost dead, but it's still a really nice and easy language to learn from. But as I said, there's no silver bullet. You might end up having a problem that requires efficiency, and for that you might end up with a trickier language like C and C++, for instance. So in summary, every programming language will have pros and cons and have its purpose and its place. But if you need to start right now, I would start with R and Python. But of course, there are others that are important, and it doesn't harm to learn, okay? And just to point out a few things, so we're going to use Python during our courses. There are a few instructions here regarding Python packages we're going to use. We're going to use Anaconda to manage libraries and dependencies. You don't need to worry too much about this, because I'm pretty sure Hannah is going to explain. And also, this is the most important one, which is Jupyter Notebooks, which is a very interactive computing service that will allow you to have your codes and your documentation and your plots in a single place. And this is actually built for data science, and it's really good for reproducibility. And we'll have a Jupyter server running. So your assignments will actually be a Jupyter notebook, a file that you're going to upload on LMS. Okay? Thank you very much for your patience. Sorry about the beginning of the class. Keep an eye on LMS. I will try to update and upload slides weekly. And yeah, thanks. Thank you very much.
I can show. Oh, people are leaving.